Support gems are key to making skills work the way you want them to, and beyond that, they offer a great range of damage, defense, and utility. However, there's a few cases where you shouldn't just blindly use the highest DPS in Path of Building. There are cases where Path of Building will say, this is the best gem for you, when in fact, the gem will reduce your DPS, or in some cases, could completely ruin your build. So in today's video, I'm going to go over some of those exceptions, with the two worst cases being Concentrated Effect Support and Elemental Focus. I'm going to talk about some situations in which PoB will lie to you and tell you it's the best option when it is absolutely not, along with some situations where it might actually be worth using. And then at the end, I'll have some honorable mentions of gems that aren't completely disastrous but can still get you into trouble if you don't know what you're doing with them. On the other hand, if the gameplay and the skill that I'm using looks interesting to you, be sure to sub to the channel and ring the bell, as I'm going to be talking about it in the near future, and I'm going to be playing the build on my live stream later. If you like talking about builds or need help, be sure to join my Discord, as that's the best place to get in touch with other people from the community who can often help you with your problems. And if you find this video helpful, be sure to leave a like, as that does really help to promote it in the algorithm, and let me know down in the comments which support gem you were using that was causing you problems. Now, on to problematic support gem number 1, Concentrated Effect. Concentrated Effect Support comes up as the top DPS in Path of Building a lot of the time, and there's cases where it's really good, but there's also cases where it's not. This is what prompted me to make the video, as someone recently reached out to me saying they were playing a Seismic Trapper based in part off of the build that I showcased. And they said that despite having a very high average hit of 700,000 in PoB, their damage seemed really low compared to my build. And was it just the gear difference where I had the Mage Blood, or was it something else? And as it turns out, the biggest difference was in fact that they had Concentrated Effect Support. On my build, I was overlapping all 6 of Seismic Trap's waves very reliably on a single target. With Concentrated Effect and with no AoE scaling, they were lucky to overlap 2. With any AoE skill that naturally overlaps and gains more overlaps from increasing the area of effect, such as Seismic Trap, it is outright detrimental to use Concentrated Effect. You'll be better off running a 5-link than having that gem. And even with skills like Righteous Fire, where it doesn't negatively impact the DPS, if you're trying to clear with RF, you really don't want Concentrated Effect Support in, because you're going to have to be so much closer to the enemy, and it's going to be a bad time. On the other hand, in the past, there are cases where it's increased the amount of overlaps, such as using Concentrated Effect to cluster the blades created by your Blade Fall so that you could overlap your Blade Blast more. And this effect still holds true. You never want to put Conc Effect on your Blade Blast, but you would want it on your Blade Fall. So when you should use Concentrated Effect are situations like that, where you actually gain overlap potential, or situations like Stormbrand, where even though the skill is tagged as AoE, it deals its damage in a different way, so the reduction to AoE doesn't matter, and it's just a nice DPS boost. Support gem number 2 that I see brought up a lot that gets a lot of people into trouble is Elemental Focus. This is because elemental ailments are good, and they're easier to scale than ever with non-damaging ailment effect. I often hear that people say, oh, but with fire damage, you just go Elemental Focus because Ignite sucks. And Ignite does kind of suck if you're not playing an Ignite build. But even then, you can use the Res Shred from something like Combustion. Or you could add the Interrogation to give yourself Secrets of Suffering, and add a little bit of non-damaging ailment effect, and all of a sudden that useless Ignite becomes a very useful Scourge, which will reduce the enemy's resistances even further. Another example I see is people who say, I'm dealing lightning damage, but I feel like I have too many little hits and not enough big hits. And if you're Elemental Overload, your damage is really consistent, this might actually be true. Especially if you're using something like Skitterbots, which is giving you a guaranteed shock effect anyway. But in a lot of cases, if you're getting that guaranteed shock effect, you might as well just go Secrets of Suffering again to get some sap in there and cause enemies to deal reduced damage to you. Alternatively, if you can crit, there's a good chance that your crits are going to inflict a larger shock, and with a little bit of non-damaging ailment effect, you'd be surprised how easily you can take an enemy to 30 or 40% increased damage taken. And doing all this is going to far outweigh the benefits from using Elemental Focus. It's especially detrimental with a skill like Elemental Hit that directly scales off of ailments. And I've seen that mistake far too often. On the other hand, let's say you're playing a cold damage over time build, and you have a Cold Snap and you have a Vortex, and your Cold Snap is chilling everything, it's being applied almost instantly because you're spell slinging, then you might as well Ellie focus your Vortex. You don't need the chill. You don't get any alt ailment effect from brittle because you're not critting anyway, and it is a pretty juicy more multiplier. Hopefully this has given you a bit of a frame of reference for when to use some of these support gems and when to ignore Path of Building when it says that it's the best option. Here are some other examples of things that can be bad but aren't nearly as bad. The first is using Blastchain Mine Support over High Impact Mine Support. The problem with Blastchain Mine Support is you have to actually chain your mines. You can't throw 2 and then detonate, you have to throw 5 to 10 and then detonate them in a chain. The biggest mistake I see people make is using Tremor Rod when they could just use a couple of +1 wands, run High Impact Mine Support, have a lot better clear, and overall the same if not better DPS on bosses, because Blastchain is only more if you're playing perfectly, and most players aren't robots so they don't play perfectly. Alternatively, there's something like Petrified Blood. I feel like the common assumption is you put Petrified Blood on, so therefore you're tanky, and nothing could be farther from the truth. Petrified Blood doesn't automatically make you tanky. Petrified Blood makes you take less damage from hits that would not have otherwise killed you. They could have killed you in accumulation, but would not have done so individually. On the other hand, it does make you more vulnerable to being one-shot. So do keep that in mind. When I see people who say, I don't understand, I've seen my favorite streamer play this build, they don't die, I die, and the difference is the streamer had a headhunter and they don't, well, if you have 3k life and Petrified Blood, you're just going to get one shot. If you have 3k life and 50,000 ES from a headhunter, probably not going to get one shot so much. Next up, Hypothermia Support. This is actually a really good support gem. The only problem is, if you're relying on the hit from the supported skill to chill the boss, it can very often turn into a 5-link when your DPS isn't high enough. There's a lot of ways around this, and I'm not going to say don't use Hypothermia in these situations, cause it's so easy to fix. Instead I'll say, use Hypothermia, but combine it with a guaranteed chill source. Have skitterbots, or maybe just put Vortex on left click. That way you'll always be getting the bonus, and your skill will never go down to a 5-link. Then we have Barrage Support, something that's surprisingly popular given how bad it feels to play a lot of the time. On paper, and in PoE, Barrage looks amazing. All my projectiles hit, I just do all the damage now. In practice, there's a couple problems with this. First, the projectiles spread out if you're not a Deadeye, and they can very easily miss if you're not very close to point-blank range. Second of all, each projectile adds attack time. So when you're playing something like a barraged power siphon that has 14 plus projectiles, you might be sitting there for the better part of a second, hoping the enemy doesn't kill you while you're attacking. It certainly has its uses and its places, but in general, regular old barrage can feel a lot better. And finally, Controlled Destruction. Controlled Destruction is the anti-crit spell damage support gem, so I see it used a lot when people are using Elemental Overload. They think, I don't need to crit, and even with 5% base crit chance, even if it's 80% less, I'll crit enough. And they put it in on PoE, and PoE says, yeah, you'll crit enough. The problem is, PoE just assumes you will crit for Elemental Overload. It doesn't go through the calculation of the hit rate and your attack or cast speed. It just says, yes, has Elemental Overload, can crit, damage, go. So again, this is one that isn't necessarily bad. But especially now with the changes to Elemental Overload where the skill itself has to crit to benefit, Controlled Destruction is almost never going to be the answer. It's still great if you don't crit at all, but if you're relying on that for EO procs, you probably shouldn't use it. So hopefully now you know which support gems to avoid if you don't want to brick your build. If you don't want to brick your build, well, that's a weird fetish, but you're allowed to be into whatever you're into. If there's any of these that you were using in your build, I'd love to hear about it down in the comments below. And if there's any other supports that I didn't mention that can also brick builds due to interactions that people might not be aware of because PoE just says, use this, it's the best, then I'd also like to hear about those. And if there's a good enough one, maybe one that's super common, I will definitely be pinning that comment. Thank you for watching. And again, a special thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members. If you want to support me, you can do so by clicking the links down in the description below or on screen right now. You can also support by making purchases through my Nexus page. Or if you just want to chill and hang out, be sure to join the Discord. Again, links for everything are down in the description below. Thank you, and have a great day.